It's linked to the history of Redditch, where the children live. In the past, in Victorian days, Redditch was well known for making needles, but nowadays in Redditch, children aren't aware of this history. So that's why we chose this abandoned factory as our point of change. And the children were enrolled as biscuit makers, and their company was very successful. It was looking for a new factory. And so they were deciding whether they should take on this abandoned building in Redditch. And part of the sale agreement was if they took on the building for their biscuit factory, they had to honour the legacy of the previous owner and the history of the building, which took us into one of the domains in Rolling Roll, which was about local history. So in today's presentation, we want to focus on one session that Iona and I did together with my class, and we want to look at really how the children responded to the tasks that we planned, to the language that we used, and the key features of Dorothy Heathcote's work.
We just feel that I think we're focusing on these features that appear in all of Dorothy's work, really, not just Rolling Roll. So we're kind of zooming in today, I think, on those moments in the classroom and how the teacher speaks to the children and how the children respond and how they open up questions for themselves and how they raise questions. And I think that's probably very relevant to people with very young children as well. She always wanted the drama to connect people to the world beyond the classroom, and in this case it is the factory, the needle factory in Redditch, and to their own lives, drawing on fictional works to make that connection. In other words, nothing was learned that was separate from life. So we're hoping to illustrate today some of the connections the children make with the content and with their own lives. It's always about the human condition, whatever you're doing in Dorothy's work. If you want people to penetrate a difficult thing, like a text, for example, give them a human being to take evidence from it. The human being is central to all your work. And in my view, I think the children have to care about the human being, they have to care about the person. And, you know, with the owner that we're going to come to in a moment, the owner of whose legacy we want to honour, he was kind of quite a high status person in Victorian times. And maybe not one that you naturally think would be someone they would care about. So my question, I think my premise is that one of the questions we ask ourselves is how can we create a circumstance through which these children will care about this man? And one of the ways of doing that obviously is to find his vulnerability, because I think we all have vulnerabilities. And if we find the vulnerability, then they connect. I'm going ahead of myself now, Lisa. Yes. Heathcote ensured the work would activate, participate, caring about, I've said that. Using inclusive language, which Lisa does beautifully. I recorded quite a lot of the stuff, so a lot of it's verbatim that I will share with you. It's always collaborative, social and community orientated, and we did use frame and frame distance, which we'll illustrate as well.
So as Iona already mentioned, we were thinking about, well, what can we do, excuse me, how are we going to get the children to care about needles? I mean, they don't see needles in their everyday life, they're just not bothered about them. So we had to think about, okay, let's take some steps back from the needles and let's try and get the children interested in this area and this time. And coincidentally, on the day that Iona and I were working together, there was a census in school. So the office have to count how many children there are in each year group, how many teachers there are, how many teaching assistants, and they have to create some data on this, and they have to send it off to the relevant people. And so I've learnt to just start having almost like a conversation with the children, and I was just chatting away to them about, oh, it's really busy in the office today, you know, it's census day, we try not to disturb them because they've got lots of counting and paperwork to do, etc., etc. And it led us into a census in Victorian days. So I said, well, you know, these censuses, have they been going on for years and years, hundreds of years? I've got one here that's of Redditch in 1861. Don't know whether you want to take a look. And of course they're like, yeah, of course. And it was a census that showed how many people in the area where the children live now were working in the needle-making industry. And it broke down the jobs. So there were pointers jobs, there were cleaning jobs, there were lots of different needle-making jobs. And it just got the children talking without any pressure and got us into the area of Victorians and needle making. So we're just trying to slowly build concern. Then if you take a look at the top right hand corner here, the next task was to take a real life floor plan map of a needle making factory from Redditch, and I blocked out some of the rooms that were in there, and you can see underneath there we'd already previously looked at the different sorts of jobs, and the task that I gave the children was to decide on the names of the rooms in the needle making factory. And you were talking to them at this point.
I was talking to them, but I was also listening very much into what they were saying, and I was just making some of the notes that I made and recorded from Lisa's conversation with them, really. I mean, the class had this responsibility, obviously, of telling the story to honour the man, but to be honest about him, and then to look at these plans of rooms and things. That's the bit we're on, isn't it?
Yeah.
And they were looking at all these different things, and Lisa said, you know, we're working out what we've got from the evidence we have. That's all we can do. And I just think that's just a lovely statement. It's so unlike a lot of statements we hear in classrooms where they say things like, oh, we've got all these plans, now let's see if you can work it out. I want you to do this, I want you to do that. It's very different to that. And it's just that statement that sort of hung in the air. We have to find, we, not you, which is immediately inclusive. We have to find out. And the child says, and the child responds and says, we can see if we can find out. So it's a really nice, connected community building up. And Lisa said, if I place things down here, she has them all over the floor, all these plans, you can do it here, or we can do it at your table, and it's up to you. What a lovely, open, welcoming sort of, you can learn the way you want to learn. And all the materials are there for you. And the child says, so we can make our own choices. We can make our, well, yes. And then work it out, and then we can discuss it all together. So the child's leading a little bit, you know. And it's just a lovely example, I think, of that language. And Lisa said, that makes sense, doesn't it? It's a question. Not, yes, that's right. Oh, yes, well done for knowing what I want you to do. Which is another error we fall into. Well done. You know, I got told off for saying well done when I started doing this work. You shouldn't be saying well done because they're a colleague. They know what they're doing. You don't say well done to a colleague. Right? So it's like reading. And then the child said, what's the pointing room? Another child said, that's where they clean the needles, isn't it? Another child's, does it matter which room is next to which? So they're negotiating their own understanding, their own meaning about the work. And they're getting to that point of engagement in the world. And the reason I think they're getting to that engagement is because they're being allowed to get into that engagement with the world. They've been invited to get in. They're listened to, and it's used within the work. So we're all in it together. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So it's just zooming into that, really. So I think the teacher language is really important there. You know, so I think, you know, it just gets them to that point of engagement, and they will begin to raise the questions. So it's not so much about answering the teacher's questions as raising their own questions. And that whole session, I think, a lot of it was about raising questions, wasn't it, Lisa?
Mm-hmm.
And putting them up and saying, these are the questions we want to know the answers to. so liberating, isn't it, for a group?
Yeah, you can't see it here, but I wrote them on a big whiteboard.
You did, yes, to come back to.
Yes.
You had all these sort of questions.
Yeah.
So you're moving on to the masks, aren't you?
Yeah, so as part of the plan there, the children were really most interested in the job of the pointer. So this was a job in the factory that paid the most money because it was the most dangerous. And the people, the men, I should say, not people, the men that did the job, were at high risk of becoming really ill, having pointers rot something in their chest and dying young. So the children were really fascinated by this. And they started talking about masks. Why are they not wearing a mask? And that's when you...
Yeah, that's right. Well, I just thought that was so very interesting, really, that they got hung up on masks, because it was after COVID. We had been using masks, obviously, in COVID. So you think, you know, and the other thing about that, as Richard pointed out the other day when we were discussing this, you know, we weren't to predict that they were going to raise the question about masks. It's about that response in the moment, isn't it? It's about, I didn't know they were going to talk about masks. Lisa didn't know. But that doesn't matter, because we learn in this work to respond to what matters to them. And so you might be asking yourself the question, you know, why does it matter that they talk about masks? You know, why is it important that we hang on to that? Because it's not really on our curriculum, is it? You know what I mean? So it's kind of, why is that important? That we, what do you think? What do you think?
No, it's just thinking like security measures. I mean, it's just something that is across the curriculum, because like anything happens, any emergencies or anything, you are ready for. Exactly. So maybe they're thinking of these security measures more than
that's right.
We are always accustomed to.
Yes.
So
I mean, I think that's right. I do think with this sort of dramatic inquiry that we get into the curriculum that isn't the curriculum you'd necessarily got written down or teaching perhaps, but you've brought that curriculum in. And so you know, I think that question about why is it important really. I mean, I think it's important because you're tapping into something they're familiar with. But it's also got them thinking about, why didn't they wear masks? Maybe they couldn't afford them. You know, why didn't they throw their clothes away after they all become contaminated? They should have thrown them away, this is what the children are saying. Well, perhaps they couldn't afford them. So they were getting into the poverty, I think, of the people who had no choice but to work in the needle factory because there wasn't anything else, rather than being blamed for not protecting themselves. So they were getting in, it's a roundabout way really of getting into the Victorian time locally. It seems a roundabout kind of way, but I think Dorothy would have said it's a shortcut. You know, it seems a roundabout because it is short because they're getting it. And they're getting into that world. Whereas if it's directly, you know, instructed, I don't think it works quite the same way. So, does that make sense?
Yeah. I think it also makes the young, makes the Victorian people human. It makes them alive.
Yes.
Because they have the same issues that we had with COVID.
Yes.
They had with the contamination of the stuff that comes off their needles. So
that's right.
They see them as humans rather than as history, and you're much more invested suddenly.
Yes, exactly, because they start to matter about them. You know, these people who are again a vulnerable situation. Really, they're attracted to that. They connect to that, and they talk about the rooms. They clean the needles. They sharp like that rock thing. It sharpens the needles. One of them says, and they get dust off that, and that makes the mill. And one boy says, which I thought was quite nice, something about, it just seems very dramatic, people getting killed cleaning needles or something, you know, it just seems very dramatic, but he's thinking about it, he's having a view of it, isn't he? Yeah. So that's very interesting, I think. And then they have the things for the room, how big should the room be, where the needles are kept? Some say the biggest room, some say because there could be millions of needles. And Lisa says, so I think it's quite funny, quite ambiguous, size is important then. She says, the room size, but size is important. I love that. I had to have a little giggle to myself, you know. But it's such a lovely sort of commentary of Lisa's interventions that she doesn't say, Yes, probably. No, they didn't have that many needles or something. You know, what a teacher thing would be to do. They didn't have millions of needles. What are you talking about, boy? That's ridiculous. So you think size is important then for the room? Well, yes, it is. Or a room needs to be near where they can go outside. Because it's where they're getting all the dust. They need fresh air. They need to go there. So it's negotiating their own meanings.
So all of this took us on to this boss of the needle factory, William Avery, his name was, and this was a real person in Redditch in the Victorian days. So I was able to do a little bit of research about him and what people had written about him. So at this current time, the children are thinking, well, you know, all of this stuff's going on in this factory. He doesn't seem to be taking care of his workers. So they'd got a sort of an idea of him as a boss who maybe wasn't very invested in his workers. And we were then trying to think about how can we put across a more rounded view of this person, and how can we show his vulnerability, like Iona says. So how can we get the children to care about him and see a wider picture? So you can see a letter there, and the letter was in his briefcase here, and then you can see a jacket that was representing him, and this was the chair that was in his office. So at this point the children stopped being biscuit makers in the current times, and they stepped into role as needle makers in William Avery's factory. And they were going around and about doing their jobs in the factory, and William Avery was in his office. And I went into role as William Avery and sat down and tried to look like there was something on my mind, that I was worried about something. And the children were able to watch whilst they were still doing their jobs. And I got the letter out of the briefcase and, you know, tried to just sort of scan across it and shake my head and put it away, trying to build some interest in this character. Did you want to say more about that?
Yeah, and that's when the children then, we said, well, we could talk to him, you know, because they wanted to find out more about why he was feeling the way he was feeling. And of course that hit a little bit of a problem really, because as workers they wouldn't really be able necessarily to just go and speak to him. You know, he was of this particular status. He was their boss. And was one
child. There's those photos.
Oh, that's
there,
it. That's
where
it.
They're going to
yes.
talk to him.
They're going to talk to him, and they, you know, but they're very tentative because they understood, you know, that you don't just barge into a boss's office, sort of thing. And one of the transcriptions I've got, the children are talking about this, and they go, "He's the manager. He's the boss, but he's not very bossy." One of them said, and the other guy says, "If you're a boss, you have to be bossy." And this is what their perceptions. I just love this. And then he goes, he is a different kind of manager, says another child. Which, you know, it's amazing if you allow children to negotiate themselves what they do come up with. He might have wanted to change the way things are done, says another. He was kind to his workers, and they had this negotiation and tentatively approached him. But they felt they couldn't really ask him things as a worker because they felt there was something personal going on there. You know, so they didn't feel it was appropriate to ask about the letter where the father had said, the father was sorry, I think the letter implied that you didn't really want to be taking over as the role of William Avery, that he was reluctant to that. So it was a different story there. So we froze it really, so they could look a bit more at the letter. And again, you're looking at a curriculum where you're looking at detail as a, you know, quite a challenging letter for a Year 4 group. So if you talk about literacy, it's all there. You know, so they were kind of thinking, oh, what can we do? So then we decided, we thought it was the wrong frame in a sense to find out what they wanted to find out. And then we tried a little bit of a cross time, I think, as well. But then eventually we had this one guy who said his brother, because the letter is to his brother, I think, isn't it? Saying, I want you to take over the factory. So one of the child said, we need the brother would speak to him. So we then reframed it. So if the brother could ask these more intimate questions, so the boy took the role on as the brother. I don't know if you've got a picture of him there, but Anyway, he talks to him.
Yeah,
I think it's,
he's there.
he is, look.
In the grey scarf.
Yes, so he talks as the brother, and then we become a bit of a collective brother. Other people can stand in as the brother as well. So there's two of us being the brother. As long as we don't contradict each other, we can both be the brother or... And then that's how they explored that.
Yeah, so all the time we're just trying to build concern for this person and deciding, sometimes we would step out of role and think, so we're learning a bit more about William Avery. Do we think we will buy this factory? Does he have a legacy that we think that we can honour in the current days? It's not just about the building, it was about him as a person and did he look after his workers? So we're just all the time trying to build this story about him and a picture about him.
But the next door class we're looking at and creating accident reports. So they were looking at a different dimension of the same man, you see. So we were looking at the man who didn't really want to do the job, but he was doing it, was kind to his workers, things mattered him. But they were looking at the accident report, so they had a different view of William Avery because of all these terrible accidents that occurred. And they were creating those. So it was rolling on. So while we would be rolling on what William Avery was like from our point of view, they'd be rolling on their point of view. So they saw 2 points of view, if you like, in the different classes. That's how we did it, didn't we, Lisa?
I think that's also really important because I remember when I grew up, I went to Italy and first time realized that people have different histories.
Yeah.
Because in school you learn, I learned German history, this is how the history was, and then I went to Italy and this guy said, well, what history is history? And I think you're already doing this here, which is fantastic.
Different histories, and never one dimension to this. There's several dimensions, isn't there? And we were looking at those several dimensions, if you like. So nothing is fixed. You can't just say he was a terrible man or he was a bossy boss. And he should be a bossy boss, they were saying. It's so interesting. You learn from the children, don't you, all the time, and you learn how they see things. So it's the best way of learning and best way of teaching is to draw on what they already know, which is what Dorothy always said, what they already know. And that comes into the whole plot, really, even when they go on about the masks. Some people would think that was deviating from a curriculum that's laid down, but it's not. Because the principle of why we wear masks and why in that time there was a lot of poverty and maybe people hadn't thought about these things. They couldn't afford to throw their clothes away. So it led there with much more meaning for them. Sorry, Lisa, interrupted.
No problem. We did then, away from the session, Iona came to a local museum with us. I don't know whether you remember these photographs as well. We thought it was worth showing these photographs again because it made us think about adult in role and how you have to really be careful with your use of language and how you position the children. Because we went to the museum here, and you can see. No, it's it's called Forge Mill. It's in Redditch, but none of the children knew it was there. Hardly anyone goes there, but it's a similar thing to the Black Country Museum. Yeah. So the buildings are still there, and they've been set up to recreate the jobs of a needle factory. Yeah. And you can see the lady there in black with the white hat on. She was in role as someone in the needle factory. And so I'm thinking, well, our children are fine. They're used to having someone in role. They're used to drama. But I don't know whether you can see the boy in the top picture in the yellow hoodie. He really wanted to have words with her because she was really, really strict, and she was really quite in role. She was really quite nasty with her choice of words to the children, but they hadn't been protected in enough to the story. He thought that this was how she was as a person, and it just made us think, Iona, didn't it, that actually it's more than just putting on a hat and a dress and going into role. You've got to build up these things with the children. They went along with it, apart from Bailey, who really then did not say anything. It was like this.
So Lisa was saying that it would be more help if the lady at the museum put the hat on in front of the children,
Absolutely.
and then put the coat on in front of the children, and then they could make that distinction between the two.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and even better if she just said a little bit about what kind of person she was and why this role existed and what influenced her, and got them to dress her and how she might walk and how she might stand and how she might address them. It's all to do with power, isn't it? They are powerless if it's imposed on them. But if they could just come and say, I think you do it this way, and you could do a little bit and say, was that all right? Shall we carry on? Then they're protected, they're in the play, they're part of the play, and that's important, I think.
Feed that back to the museum.
Oh, I think that would be a very good thing to do, Lisa.
I think it also gives many people no access to her role.
Yes.
It's an access problem as well,
Yes,
because
right, yes.
say you don't know nothing about Victorian
Yeah.
times, about how these factories were run. You stand there like Bailey and think, why is she like that?
Yes.
Instead
yes.
of she could have even, you don't even have to, I mean, it'd be much deeper to do what Richard said, that would be fantastic, but she could have just said, I'm acting out this person,
Yes.
this is how people behave, we
yes,
think,
exactly.
and then people get access. But like this, it's like and I always feel very uncomfortable in these situations. So actually, I'm like Bailey, I'm in there like, this is not, even though I know,
Exactly, yeah.
I know it, and I'm that person thinking, oh, that's not really, it doesn't really help you. I think it just makes you feel bad.
Yeah.
So maybe feed that back. I have to say, we did that in our project, and it wasn't completely well received.
No.
But you have to work it.
Yeah. You can reinforce the stereotype as well.
Yeah.
Like, you know, this is what they were like in Victorian times, you know what I mean? As if they're not human beings as part of that context of their time, which they obviously are, just like William Avery is. It's really interesting.
So yeah, it did make us think of those features of Dorothy Heathcote's work.
It was also great that they looked at some of the accidents. They had lots of bleeding fingers and bleeding bands, and they were so attracted to the accidents that happened as well. It's what they bring to the visit, isn't it? And I think Dorothy often said, if you're going to a visit, it's what they do beforehand. You don't do the visit first. You come to the visit with lots of stuff you've invested in, because it means so much more to you. Sorry, Lisa.
No, it's fine.
Interrupting you again.
So we just wanted to flash up whether we'd followed the rules of rolling roll. And we talked more in detail about these last time, but we think that we did. We won't go through those.
No, they were just a couple
Okay.
like all the tasks have an affective concern the human element.
Sorry, Iona, we are going through some.
No, well, I thought
aren't
we did. I thought we said we'll just mention
Yes.
a few of them, which is the affective concern, you know, that the human elements, any tasks that were said were to do with that. And also,
So we had teachers' control.
yes,
of language.
teacher control of language, which I think we've illustrated with Lisa's. We touched on that with Lisa's work. And tasks must carry a reasonable element from the student point of view. Circumstances have to feel authentic with them. So negotiating with them, how we enter the work. Framing of the class.
Really, our focus will be on keeping the key features of Dorothy Heathcote's work in what we do, which is what we started with here. And Iona, you tell us, don't you, that Dorothy Heathcote was always modifying her work, like you say, and adapting it to the context and the children.
I think the main thing is we stick to these very foundational principles, fundamental principles, I think. I think the principles are very, very important, really, in my view. And the way we adapt them to our own circumstances is what we need to address, really.
Yeah, so we said making them work for your class, didn't we, your situation. And Iona said, be thinking teachers, don't blindly follow people.
I think so. You know, because we always say we want to be like her, or we want to do things as she would do them. And I don't think it's so much. I mean, I've spent a life trying to do things like she does, unfailing. But in a sense, it's not just about that. It's about, you know, applying the principles and recognising some of her techniques, and of course using them because they work. But it's about following our own path, but remembering these very fundamental principles, like the shifting of power, which I hope we've illustrated there. You know, that they negotiate their own meaning about curriculum, that it's a curriculum that matters to their life, not one that's completely divorced. Because I think she said once, you know, when when the children walk into a classroom, I don't expect them to hand themselves on the coat hooks with his coat and bags. I expect them to bring their whole selves in. So I think it's holistic and it's about their life. Not directly, because that could be insensitive, but in a sense connecting with what they can bring, what they volunteer to bring as well.
The most difficult for us, it was that, exactly that, the language, because sometimes I didn't know what to say.
Yes.
We didn't know what to say.
Yes.
And sometimes I talk with Bruna and I said, oh, let them do what they want.
Yes. That's right.
Because we didn't know exactly what to say.
I think you're right. I think it's scary because I think it's about change.
Yeah, and we felt scared, but then we
give them wings.
Let
change
them know
is,
do what they
change
want.
is scary. Change is so scary.
Yeah.
And the best advice Dorothy gave to me, anyone, others like me, was, you know, try to use we instead of you for the start off. Not you and I, but just we. You know, try that. Listen to yourself, she would say. So when you're in the classroom and you say, so what are you doing there then? Change it to, oh, I see you've drawn there. Is that, oh, interesting. So you start listening to yourself. Yeah, be your own spectator if you like. I'm listening to myself and I'm going to, you know, you can correct yourself if nobody's looking, who cares? Yeah. Do you know what I mean? I just thought I've been making mistakes for years, so it doesn't really matter how many more I make, but at least now I'm listening to myself. So that's the first step, I think, listening to yourself. Second step is noticing the response from the child when you do change. Listen to that response. And it might only take a few minutes. Make a note of it. Say, I notice a difference. And it's the start of change, I think, anyway.
Yeah, it is tricky, I think.
Go on.
Because I think as a teacher, you're thinking ahead, what's coming next, what do I need to do, what do I need to say?
Yes,
we need control, we need to control everything.
Yes.
Time controlling. We want to be under control, but we don't need that.
Yeah.
The
So
control
yeah, it's
thing,
hard to listen, to train yourself to listen to the children. We often, I will say, so are you saying that? Rather than just say the same words back to them.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a lovely thing, you know, like you said, the
Yeah.
size matter, you said that. So you think size matter, you're beginning to acknowledge what they've said and build on it. And in terms of control, I think, when I was in Lisa's class, and I found this a lot, is when you have the material out, the material controls very often. Because where they're looking, and we together are looking at that. They're not all looking at you. We're all looking at that. And it's another, and it's a distraction, but it's an attraction as well. So they're sorting something, they have a task, they've got things in their hands. So in a sense, the materials and the purpose are controlling them. So once you've got them into, you know, I wonder what we could do, and they buy into it, once they've bought into it, I think the control then becomes, the work sort of controls it. Do you think so, David? The work tends to.
And I think you're right in saying not to say anything.
I think you're right.
If we stay quiet, then a child will say something.
Yes,
and
yes.
we don't need to say.
Yes, yes.
Sorry,
That's no. I think that's one of the big skills I've learned, that you just stand there, and I could feel the teacher next to me really nearly, in German we say jumping out of their skin with tension.
Yes.
And I'm just like, don't say anything.
Yes.
And the first child, and I keep asking questions, I'm like, how should we solve this? And suddenly one child goes like this, and you go, oh wow, that's a good idea. Whatever it is.
Yes.
And that's it. The floodgates open, people contribute.
Because that child will witness you, other children, will witness you not ridiculing somebody with maybe a bizarre suggestion, but accepting. They see you accepting, acknowledging and building. And when other people see you doing that, other children, they take the risk too of speaking, because they know you're not going to put them down. They know you're not going to say that's wrong. So I think that's, it's a whole culture shift.
Yes.
And the whole community works differently. And that's why I think in Lisa's group it works so well.
Also the ideas you use, like what you say when you say back to them, these motives when you do more research around, just in case if you feel, I had these moments where I felt really insecure about it, and then for example that's what they use in nonviolent communication.
Yeah.
That you don't say, oh Iona, you just said this,
Yes.
so I don't say what you said, you say it back,
Yes.
Like, so I hear,
Yes. What
I
you
hear what you say,
yes.
and then you repeat. And that's a
it.
non-violent form of communicating.
Interesting.
Also in appreciative inquiry, use this as a reframing method. So there's a lot of, it's in many, many methods, and I've personally found that useful to back it.
Absolutely.
So when people doubt you, you can also say, well, they do it in non-violent communication. They go like, ooh. You know, like sometimes you have to impress people because leaders might go, I know we don't work in these situations, but when we step outside Ofsted or whatever, you can just say, well, so I found, and I learned lots from there as well, which actually also feeds into this.
Definitely.
I think a lot of it goes back to really good early years practice and really good practice with the children in the early years. I mean, I wrote down the strength of the intervention that you make as a teacher. You can only judge that by the quality of the reaction from the children. So that intervention might be silent and just your eyes, you know. It might be one word. So what is the quality of the response from the child? Well, we'll only know that by the quality of our own intervention, and I think it's really, really worth thinking about and practicing it. You know, I think it's really important to practice these things with children in class. There's nothing wrong with it, and only by practicing this type of work and practicing our interventions, and you'll only get that by walking around and talking or listening to the children, will we get better at it, and then the quality of their responses will get better.
I was going to say, at one point we had almost like the starts of some of these things written down. So we had like, oh, that's interesting, or are you saying that? We had them written down and we had them up around the room so that when we were doing this kind of work, we could just look in case we couldn't remember. So yeah, we like purposely practiced them, didn't we? Until we found the ones that felt natural to us. So what I will say will be different to what someone else in the next room will say, even though it's the same principle. It's about slowing down time and allowing the children to take control. We did purposely practice them. Yeah.
I think Dorothy talks about, she used the word crucible, doesn't she?
Yeah.
The classroom, it feels like you're within a crucible or a laboratory. And again, I think that came across really, really strongly in why you started the talk today. Because I think if you can get into that mindset, then it is much easier to not dominate if you're thinking of it as like a crucible. Because you can stir it around, but equally they can stir it around. Anybody can stir it around, and that will make it productive. And the other thing I remember her saying to me in a conference years ago, and it terrified me, as a, you know, when you have to teach maths and the whole curriculum, and she said, don't ask a question that you know the answer to. And I thought, oh my stars, how do you do that in a maths lesson? and I practiced a lot with that, and it is about the you find yourself wondering if anybody knows the answer to, because you don't know. They might all not know, but that again, that power shift, and that I found that really blew me away for a couple of years, that you can't ask a question you already know the answer to, because you immediately put them in a different place. You immediately reassert yourself as the teacher, the all-knowing, and you really want to get off that in everything, really. So yeah, I just thought I'd chuck that in.
And just following on from what you said, Jill, one of my favourite quotes from Dorothy is, "It's crucibles, not jugs," by which she meant, I mean, children tend to be treated like they're empty jugs that you fill up with knowledge. But if you think crucible, she says, if you think from tomorrow, if you go into school and you think it's crucibles, not jugs, you change the world. Because it changes the classroom completely.
I think for me also the crucible is about, because we do project-based, you know, how we work, and I talk about this as an organisation, that's how we work.
Yeah.
So we are nothing without all the parts.
No, absolutely.
So I'm just the producer, but if I haven't got the parts, there's nothing for me to do.
That's right. Yeah.
So it's that producer approach. So you, as a teacher, you're kind of almost like a producer who needs to make sure the work gets. So you can help say, oh, maybe this is a different shift. I think that's totally that. And then you have that gold or whatever you do in a crucible. I'm not good at that.
Because I think as well, the jug, and this is what I feel, I speak so much, the jug, it's as if there's a hole at the bottom.
Yeah.
So you're busy pouring in the top and it's escaping out the bottom. Because what you've taught 1 week, 3 weeks later,
And it's
if you're teaching that male.
Second the system.